So he has agreed with me that he believes in a singularity as a God. That means that Allah's light cannot be separated from Allah himself.
The argument that Allah can't be compared to anything, therefore he can't be compared to this thing, Allah compared his light, not himself. So when God says Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, and it says his light is like this, then what's being described is not God. It's one of his attributes, characteristics, or something that he possesses.
The issue with this is that in the very verse that says that Allah can't be compared to his creation, it lists attributes.
But the issue is, this is hadith-based Muslims. So I think the Christians and the hadith-based Muslims are both wrong, right? So if you go to 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 2, 40 and 2 years old was Ahaziah when it began to rain, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, daughter of the king of Omri. But if you go to 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 26, 20 and 2 years old was Ahaziah when it began to rain, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 1 year. His mother was Athaliah, daughter of the king of Omri. So it doesn't make sense either.
So let me reply. Let me reply. Now notice. Are you done? Let me reply.
Okay, cool.
So notice how the Muslim wanted to get off the topic of their hadith as soon as possible. So let me deal. Okay, so you reply. So bro, you still have a problem in your Quran alone.
Show me.
Here's the problem in your Quran alone. Are you listening? Okay. Can Allah be compared to anything in his creation? Now say that in English.
And there is nothing comparable unto him.
Say it louder.
There is nothing comparable unto him.
Say it right to the back.
You can't compare things with God.
You can't compare things with God. You all heard him say that. Can you compare anything to Allah? No. So now let's read what the Quran says. Surah 24, ayah 35. Allah is the light. Everyone say light.
Light.
Of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his light. Everyone say light.
Light.
Is as it were a niche. Everyone say niche.
Niche.
And within it is a lamp. Everyone say lamp.
Lamp. Everyone say stick it up your jaw.
The lamp. Say lamp.
Lamp.
Enclosed in glass. Everyone say glass.
Glass.
The glass. Say glass.
Glass.
The glass as it were. A brilliant star. Everyone say star.
Star.
Lit from a blessed tree. Everyone say tree.
Tree.
An olive. Everyone say olive.
Olive.
Neither of the east of the west. Whose oil? Everyone say oil.
Oil.
How many created things did we just list? 5 created things, and Allah compares himself to them.
Okay, guys, that was a classic logical fallacy. It's called a non sequitur argument. He does not follow. Now what he said was, can anything be compared to Allah? And then he compared Allah's light to something. Right? No. Allah said his light, the analogy of his light is like a lamp within a niche. So what Allah did was compare the light of Allah. 1 second. Allah just gave a comparison for the light of Allah, but he's treating it as if Allah gave a comparison for Allah. So again, all cats are mammals, all dogs are mammals, all cats are dogs. That was an example of what he just did. So although Allah did give a comparison of his light as a lamp within a niche, he did not compare anything to himself. So these two things are not a contradiction, it's a contradiction. But he hasn't addressed the numerical contradiction in 2 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 2, 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 26, and all of you noticed the nice little deflection about lamps. It's very theatrical.
So allow me to reply. Allow me to reply. So, did you all hear him say that Allah was comparing himself to himself?
No.
That's what he said.
No.
The light
I said
of... Stop. Are we going to interrupt one another now? Is that what you're going to do
I
this?
apologise, sir. It's very rude of you.
Because in a shouting match, bro, trust me,
I apologise.
I can go louder and longer than you can.
I apologise.
So, okay, thank you. Right. So notice, ladies and gentlemen, he said that my analogy was a false one because Allah in his book compared his light. Well, what did he compare his light to? Nothing. He said, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, the parable of his light. Now think for 1 second.
David, you're crying, man. Allow it.
What, when it says that his light, as it were, is one enclosed in a lamp, in a glass, in a niche, what do any of these words mean if Allah is not comparable to anything in his creation? Let me finish. If I say light, what do you imagine?
Red.
If light, exactly. If I say glass, what do you imagine? If I say oil, what do you imagine? If I say a tree, what do you imagine? So, if Allah is not comparable to any of these things, then these words are meaningless to you. No, yeah, I'm nearly finished. So the Quran might have well have said this, because this is what it means. Allah is the blah of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his blah is as if there were a blah, and within it a blah. The blah enclosed in blah. The blah, as it were, a brilliant blah, lit from a blessed blah, and a blah, neither of the east of the west, whose blah is well nigh blah. Because if these words are not like anything you can think or imagine, then these words are meaningless. Yes.
Guys, I want to do a quick English grammar lesson. I don't think people know English, right? Yeah? So there's something. Hey, let me finish, man. Calm down, man.
Yeah, calm down, big boy. Calm down, big boy.
Relax.
Because I know you're big against, women,
can I finish, please?
but you don't intimidate me, chav.
Yeah, don't intimidate no one. Come on. Listen, guys.
Sorry for touching.
Can I please finish?
Yeah.
Guys, quick English lesson. So there's something called a possessive pronouns. So if I say his car,
Yep.
the car's not him, right? So if I compare something to his car, it's like his car's like a Ferrari. His car's like a spaceship. I'm not comparing a person. I'm comparing something that belongs to him. So when Allah says his light is like something, and you try to argue to the crowd that this means he's comparing himself to this thing, or the blah, as you put it, it's a bit confusing to me. It's like people don't know English. So when Allah says he is the light of the heavens and the earth, and then he says his light is like ... The argument that Allah can't be compared to anything, therefore he can't be compared to this thing, Allah compared his light, not himself. So it doesn't make sense, guys. And if you need to brush up on your grammar or your understanding or grasp of possessive pronouns, then go do that. Otherwise, there's no way you can see that as a legitimate point.
Please
And we
answer
can
the
move
numerical
on.
question as well.
And the second,
Numerical question, please.
hey, once again, second point, nobody has addressed the first point I made still now. It's just sitting on the table lonely.
Okay.
So, Second Chronicles and Second Kings, just unaddressed. We've slapped away 2 weak arguments. Let's wait for the third while we ignore this question.
Okay,
After you, sir.
so the topic that I was talking about, that this brother interrupted, and I welcome his interruption, I'm happy to debate with him, was about this passage in the Quran. I'm not going to get deflected onto talking about a topic that I addressed earlier today over there. He can watch Soko films and hear how the response would go. So, listen to what he said. He tried to give me a grammar lesson without understanding the grammar. He talked about the possessive pronoun, that Allah wasn't comparing himself to the light, but comparing his attribute, the light, his light. Remember, But now think about the example that he gave about the Ferrari. But then someone told you that when you imagine a Ferrari, that can't be the thing that we're talking about. If someone said to you, your car is like a Ferrari, but everything you can think of, everything that you can conceive, and everything that you can imagine a Ferrari to be is not the car. That means that the word Ferrari means absolutely nothing. Because it can only mean something if you have a point of reference. No. He said that the parable is about the light of Allah. Well, I want him to tell me what light means in this context. And since this attribute of light has been compared to a glass, a niche, an olive tree, oil, and a lamp, I want him to tell me what the terms tree, olive, oil, glass, and niche mean in this context. Because if he can't tell me what they mean, and he can only tell me what they're not, then this is not clear guidance as it claims to be. It is a mumble jumble of meaningless words.
So, just to go back again, because I see where the brain fart's happening. So if you just go...
I'm going to have to use that one.
Yeah, I know, I like that.
I like that one.
Open the window.
Yeah.
But check this. So check this. This is the brain fart that I just want to clear up here. Now what we have is, with this car reference, I think I'll confuse you guys. God cannot have anything compared to him, because there's nothing comparable unto God. It says that in the Quran, Surah Al-Ikhlas. However, God owns things, such as his light, it belongs to him, his earth, and you can compare them to a million different things. And there's a reference and it makes sense. So when God says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, and it says his light is like this, then what's being described is not God. It's one of his attributes, characteristics, or something that he possesses. So God's saying that he created something and he describes that, and then you saying that's the same as him describing himself or comparing something to himself, it's just a little brain fart, little cross of wires. Let's clear that up. So when God talks about the light,
we should do this again. This is fun.
I know.
This is
I'm
fun.
a fan.
I like this.
I follow you on YouTube. But listen, I'm a fan.
If you are not aware of
No, relax.
It's all right.
then
What I'm saying is,
It's all right, Uncle. I've got him.
what I'm saying is that the little mix-up between God's comparing himself to something else versus God is talking about his light and comparing it to all the things that he compared it to is another thing. Secondly, he set a premise, a supposition, if you will. If I can't explain what that particular verse means, right, then it means that it's meaningless. Now that's actually quite facetious, because understanding is a process, and I'm sure you increase your understanding of the Bible day by day. So that kind of set the bar that high, mate. It's quite ridiculous.
Can I
And I would
reply?
never set my expectations so high as to, if I don't understand everything right now, it's all meaningless. That's a bit crazy, because I would say there's a few verses in the Bible. For example,
can I reply?
there she lusted after men whose genitals were like that of donkeys and
Size of donkeys.
Yeah, it's like, you could explain that to me, and it might be very interesting. Maybe Israel and Egypt, you know, they're like
Can I reply to your argument?
Okay, I'm still. Let me just
Okay.
do one second. I'm just saying, there's a little bit of a confusion. There's no contradiction there, and it's nowhere close to the 42 and the 22 contradiction I presented.
Can I reply now?
After, go for it.
So, notice, I asked him just to tell me, what does light mean? What does a tree mean? What does an olive mean? What does glass mean? What does a lamp mean? What does oil mean in this verse? And notice he didn't do it.
It's a lot of pressure.
So maybe he'll come back to that.
I can.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. You had your chance. You'll get another chance. Don't worry. Everyone gets a second chance. Everyone gets a second chance. But allow me to address the verbal diarrhea that you've just heard. Because we can all use these kind of metaphors. Yeah, you started it with your verbal
thought
thought.
it was hilarious.
I thought it was
Brave
hilarious.
thought, brave thought.
It's a good one. I like debating this guy. He's funny. But being funny isn't the same as making a logical argument. They're not the same thing. So, in the Hadith, in the Quran, we have a description of one as Allah's attributes. I accept that part of his argument.
Yes. He accepts it.
I never denied it.
I'll do a roly-poly.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
That's the first time.
So before my brother starts doing cartwheels and setting off the fireworks,
That's the first
let's just address the problem. Muslims believe in a God that is an absolute one.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, 100%.
A monad. Yes.
Monotheistic.
Monotheistic. A monad. Singular.
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 No second. Yeah.
No second.
No plurality. No trinity.
So thank you. Listen, are you ready? Let me finish.
All right, cool.
So he has agreed with me that he believes in a singularity as a God. That means that Allah's light cannot be separated from Allah himself. So when it talks about Allah's attributes, that possession of his attributes is not distinguishable from himself. And if it is distinguishable from himself, then they have contradicted themselves in claiming to believe in a monad and a singularity. But that attribute is still divine. Even if we grant that in some way it's separate from the person of Allah himself. That means that when the Quran says that nothing and no one is comparable to Allah, that also includes all of his attributes. All of his attributes. And that includes therefore his light. And that means that Allah is comparing his light to things that are created. So Allah has either contradicted himself by saying that you can't compare me or my attributes to anything in creation because he does it himself. All these words are utterly meaningless frivolities. They are sounds and nothing more, with no meaning and no context. Please start your answer by telling me in this verse what the tree is, what the olive is, what the oil is. Tell me what these things mean.
So let's just deal with the first thing, the light, the thing that's been compared the most, right? So Allah, if you look at other parts of the Quran, Allah talks about the disbelievers want to put the light of Allah out with their mouths. Allah talks about the Quran being a light and a guidance. Allah talks about people walking in the light versus someone that doesn't have light, right? These things, guidance itself is described as light in the Quran. So when Allah talks about his light, I just want to nip something in the bud though. There's something just fundamentally illogical. He just made a premise which I think is fundamentally flawed. He said, because God is mono in nature or singular, monad, his attributes and characteristics have to also not be compared to anyone, right? So you can't compare anything in his characteristics. That's fundamentally not true. God is the most merciful. Some people are merciful to a different degree, right? Yes. God is the most, all of his attributes can be compared. What can't be compared is God himself, right? Because, and in this context of Allah saying that in Surah Al-Ikhlas, Allah says, "Qul huwallahu ahad." Allah is one. Allah is samad, the self-sufficient. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He was not born, nor does he give birth. Wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. And there is nothing comparable unto him. This is talking about the nature of God in reality, right? When we're talking about the characteristics of God, being the most just, God gives justice to people, being the most merciful. God gives mercy and the capacity for mercy for human beings. So this is, again, I don't want to go back to brain fart, but it seems to be working really well. That's my best one.
Verbal diary, yeah.
What I'm saying is, that's just, I don't know, that's like a little faux pas, right? So now, when it comes to olives, when it comes to all of these other analogies that I've given, right, you can go and speak and see.
Clearly it's not an olive.
No, but this is what I'm trying to say to you, right, So, you can see that there's loads of different analogies that are describing the guidance of Allah. Now when he speaks about trees, for example, other places of the Quran, it talks about bad earth and the good earth. And the bad earth being something that doesn't grow except with great sparsity and difficulty, and the good earth being something that grows with the permission of its Lord, right? When we're talking about all of these things, it's space for you to reflect. Now to talk in the context of every single analogy has one specific answer that's not based on context or the individual or the time or the era or even how you're feeling that weekend and how you're feeling and what God was trying to say to you when you read it. These things might mean different things for you depending on when you read them and how you feel when you read them and what God's trying to say to you in that particular moment. And I believe in a divine book. Talk to me. So I believe, apologies, I don't want to make you feel ignorant.
Otherwise I'll just stop my own conversation.
No, I got sidetracked.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, these things, these examples are all utilities for us to reflect upon and increase our faith.
Thank you.
So I'm saying, depending on, I might read it on a Monday, and it means one thing to me, and I'm not saying that there's maybe, Allah says in Surah Al-Imran, that no one has a perfect interpretation of the Quran. So and Allah will clear up the differences in the Day of Judgment.
Can I reply?
So I'm saying to you that requirement to know each and every one, as if there's an answer or a pop quiz, is not there. Secondly, I've given you a working understanding of the word light, just so you can get like some sort of flavour of the other parts of the Quran and describe it. And thirdly, the difference between characteristics being able to be described versus God himself. And God, at no point does he say, none of God's characteristics can be compared. He says God cannot be compared.
Let me ask you this question. So let me no, brother.
First argument's still not been addressed.
The first argument had nothing to do with the topic.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You jumped in onto my topic and my discussion.
Will you answer after you finish?
And you control.
So what we got, listen, to what he said. He tried to say that Allah himself cannot be compared to anything in his creation, but his attributes can.
Absolutely.
So that means that the attributes of Allah can be compared to the created world. And he's thumbing up, he's saying yes.
I'm merciful.
There we go. So he's saying that Allah's attributes can be compared to things in creation. The issue with this is that in the very verse that says that Allah can't be compared to his creation, it lists attributes. Listen carefully. He is the creator. That's an attribute of the heavens and the earth. He has made for you pairs from amongst yourselves and pairs among the cattle. By this means does he multiply you. There is nothing whatever like unto him, and he is the one who hears and sees. So in the very verse that says that Allah cannot be compared to his creation, it lists three of the attributes that cannot be compared. No, this brother is saying that the attributes of Allah can be compared to creation, but Allah himself cannot be compared. God is known through the working of his attributes. We know that God is the creator because he created. We know that God is merciful because he gives mercy. We know that God is the first because nothing comes before him, and he is the last because nothing comes after him. In other words, if you don't know God through his attributes, you don't know God at all. You know nothing about God at all. So he's essentially saying that these attributes do not communicate who God is. No, nearly finished. That means, in terms of God's attributes, he says they are comparable. These are the only things that we know about God at all, which means that all knowledge to God is comparable, and when it says that Allah is not comparable to God, it is once again saying nothing.
Alright, so there's a bit of a mistake there. He mentioned some things that are attributes. He mentioned some things that are attributes and something that are not attributes. God creating the heavens and the earth is not an attribute. It's an event that occurred that God did.
Creator.
No. Him being a creator is a title that comes from him creating.
That's not an attribute.
No. So for example, mercy, being merciful is an attribute. And it's an attribute that human beings possess. But creating the heavens and the earth is not an attribute. It's not an attribute anyone else can possess. You either did it or you didn't do it. Right, yeah? Like, did you create the heavens and the earth? No. Did he create the heavens and the earth? Yes. It's an action. It's an act or a job that somebody did and somebody else didn't do and nobody else did except God. So for him to present that the same way as an attribute really doesn't make sense. So I'd like to say that the attributes that are attributes, such as being merciful, all these things, they can be compared, and the qualities or the things that God has done that belong only to him, that are part of his essence or what make God God, i.e. creating the heavens and the earth, being the self-sufficient master. These things are the things that he's alone in, being the one who creates and no one else creates. being the one who destroys, no one else destroys, being the one who punishes, only like he punishes. There's things that you compare about those that punish, but in terms of those that possess hellfire, there's only one being that possesses hellfire. That's my answer. But guys, can
Bro,
I say,
just out of courtesy, I'm now going to answer your question at the end.
Oh, there you go. Yes! Second Chronicles answer.
Okay, so, I mean, I will have to look into it in more detail.
Scribal error.
And once I look into it in more detail, it may very well change my answer.
Cool.
But my instinctive answer is to simply say it is a scribal error. Because in the Christian faith, we don't make claims about our Bible that you make about your Quran. So if there was a scribal error that had simply changed an age and nothing more, then for us this is not a problem. This is not a problem at all.
I think that's a great answer, and in my opinion, maybe 2/3 of the Bible is a scribal error. So let's just.
You'd have to prove that.
Yeah, we'll go
You'd have
through
to
it.
prove
We'll go
that.
through it.
You'd have to prove that.
I'm just saying, no problem. So you know the difference between.
Wait, bro. I was just doing that as a courtesy
I really
at the
appreciate
end.
that. Can I just
I'm
say-
not going to have
I'm
another
a-
discussion.
no.
We're finishing.
I'm a fan. I think you make very articulate points, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
I really enjoyed it as well.
really
It was a
did.
pleasure to
Thank
speak.
you so much.
In fact, I enjoyed it so much. I'd like to give you a gift. I'd like to give you a gift.
Yeah, that was a really fun conversation, man. Yeah, man.
All verbal diarrhea aside.
All brain farting aside. And it sounded wet, so have a shower afterwards.
Okay. So here you go, bro. Just trying to think of a nice one for you. There you go. What Christians believe at the end of the world.
Yeah, thank you, man.
It just explains what
Well,
Christians
you've got
believe
a
about
Quran
the end.
already, so I've got
Yeah, I've got
nothing
the
to give
Quran.
you.
No worries. It's a pleasure.
I think that's enough.
It's a pleasure.
That's enough for
All
guidance
right.
for mankind.
You don't want to give
Until
him
next
Bukhari?
time.
No Bukhari, no Bukhari. Listen, I don't believe in hadith.
Yeah.
And I think the points that you make are on point. And I've watched your videos before, and out of all the videos I watched, I thought yours were on point. I want to speak to you because I think our beliefs are closer than anyone.
From speaking to you, like even you made something that's very akin to the Christian energy attribute distinction in terms of the attributes of Allah.
We agree on a lot more than we disagree on.
I think we disagree on certain fundamental things that we can't get around.
Yeah, like God having kids.
Oh,
It's a biggie for me.
It'd be interesting to know what you understand by that. So let's talk again next week.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and we'll talk some more.
I can't
I'll
wait.
be real with you, like, I usually work Sundays. Do you have an email address or something? I'd love to.
BTB. Well, you watch soccer films, so it'll be captured on mic. You can hear it, but you can type it. btbsoko@gmail.com.
That's why it's money a lot.
Bravo Tango Bravo, Sierra Oscar Charlie Oscar.
It wasn't meant to be. Did I think? Yeah,
It's all right.
My
So
battery's dead.
yeah, btbsoko@gmail.com. Drop us an email. I'll let you know though, and I probably just want to say this for the camera. I've got nearly 1,000 emails, so if you are waiting for an email, I am desperately doing my best. I go through all the pages of my emails and I do some from each page, but I've got nearly 1,000 emails to reply to. So if you're waiting for an email, I am very sorry. I will get around to you, but at this rate, some of you might be waiting years.
I'm gonna send you an email tomorrow, and I'm waiting 2025.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah, definitely.
2026. What do you say?
We'll talk. God bless.
care. God
All
bless
right,
you.
take care. Yeah, let's do a quick wrap up. So what we saw in the Hadith literature is a clear description that Allah has either an attribute or a created thing that veils his other attributes. Now, if it veils his attribute, i.e. Allah's attributes can be restrained by something else, then that simply means that Muslims don't have any complaint about the idea that the divine attributes of our Lord Jesus Christ can be restricted or constrained by him being veiled in flesh. Tabernacle literally means, when it says in the Gospel of John that the Logos tabernacled amongst us, it literally means to enter into a tent. Well, what's a tent except for a material thing that you could equate to a veil? Now, whether that is a created thing, as the Muslims that I was arguing with said, or an uncreated thing, the reality is the same. Allah's attributes are restricted by something else, and they don't see any contradiction in it, which means that they cannot complain of contradiction when we believe in the incarnation. Furthermore, the Quran states that Allah is not comparable to anything he has created, but in a single verse, Allah compares himself or his attributes to 5 created things, which, if they don't mean anything that we can think of, imagine or conceive, mean that this book is not clear guidance because it doesn't say anything. If these words do mean something, then Allah has compared himself to something created, even though he says you can't. God bless.